Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to week 9 lecture or talk concerning the topic for week 9 as per your course outline. So, before I begin, let me quickly show you from the outline what I'm going to be talking about. So, as mentioned, we are into week 9. Last week, I talked to you about creativity at the business or organizational level, as you can see here. And in this regard, I reviewed a book titled Innovation Harnessing Creativity for Business Growth. This is an edited book, primarily edited by Adam Jolly, having a number of different sections or chapters or sections. So the purpose of that session was to give you a sense of the salient characteristics or major dimensions of organizations that demonstrate creativity. What are some of their features because of which they have a greater propensity for creativity and innovation. By the end of that talk, I also showed you a case study or a handout related to Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey. Uh, this is a famous, well-renowned circus, uh, and I have already shared a copy of this handout with you through Google Classroom. And for week 9, I'm going to be having a case discussion with a focus on lessons in creativity for Peshawar's restaurant businesses while using this handout that I've shared with you. Um, and for this video talk that I'm delivering, I'll be reviewing some of the key points of this case study or handout. Um, Before I begin to talk about the case study, let me quickly share the week 9 task. For this week, I'm not just merely delivering a session on a particular topic, but you will also be assigned a task as evidence that you have watched this video, you have read the handout, and you understood some of the fundamental aspects discussed through this video talk and the handout. So in this regard, the task for week 9 for you guys will be that you will be watching the video talk, that is the current one that I'm delivering right now, whereby I'm focusing on the case study lessons in creativity for Peshawar's restaurant businesses. You will be required to read the case study handout thoroughly, which has been shared with you through Google Classroom during week 8. The reason is that week 9's discussion is connected with our original topic on organizational creativity, which was discussed during week 8. So besides reading this case study handout, you are also required to take notes. You can take these notes in your diary or notebook. Make sure that this is a regular habit that you follow for all online lectures that you watch and all the handouts that you read topic wise. And finally, the most important task for week 9 is that at the end of this case study or handout that I am reviewing in a while, you will be required to answer 3 questions at the end of this case study and submit the answers uh, through the Google Classroom as per the instructions. Now, please note that this is an individual exercise, meaning that you are required to address or answer your questions independently or individually. I'm not looking for the right answer. I'm looking for an independent answer which reflects your own thoughts, ideas, and reflections. So the more original you are, the more genuine you will appear in terms of your write-up, and the better the chances of receiving a good grade for this particular assignment or task. So please stay original and do not share your ideas or thoughts with anyone. So now moving towards the main handout. So this is the case study, Lessons in Creativity for Peshawar's Restaurant Businesses. As highlighted during my week 8 discussion, this is derived from an article uh, titled What Can Failure of Business Teach Us About Creativity at the Organizational Level? And as I had mentioned, this has been written by Aaron D. Allen. The source and the other information is provided below. There have been some changes which I have incorporated in this handout. So there have been some updates as of April 2020. So some of the key aspects of this handout, I have highlighted them. Uh, Primarily, this handout starts with a little bit of background information about Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey. You might recall that connected with week 8, you were required to watch a small video about this entertainment company, whereby we are informed about the company going out of business. And this company, as I mentioned last week also, it was originally started in 1871. This is based in the United States. It remained fully functional for 146 years, and it was only in 2017, early 2017, by March of that year, that the company went out of business and its journey ended. So the purpose of this handout that you're looking in front of you is to connect some of the uh, lessons that can be learned from the failure of such a strong and well-established 146-year-old company with regards to creativity, some of the lessons that can be learned and how those lessons can be drawn upon in terms of the restaurant sector or the food category or food sector in any city. So for the purpose of relevance, I have connected this case study with any major city of Pakistan, for instance, Peshawar, because that is where some of us are based. And the idea is that based on the lessons derived from this case study, what lessons can the restaurants of Peshawar or any other major city can learn? So that's the focus of this talk. So starting with the first paragraph, it merely informs you about the origins of the company, Barnum, Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey. So nothing special about it. You can read it later on. Moving to the next paragraph, we are informed that um, uh, the circus delivered its final show in 2017. Um, However, the reasons given by the CEO of the company at that time, Mr. Kenneth Feld, were that the circus was resulting in very high operational or operating costs, and the company was facing a continuous problem in terms of dwindling or declining ticket sales. And for some reason, they were not really able to reverse this trend or stop this trend of declining ticket sales. And as a result, Mr. Kenneth Feld, the CEO at the time in 2017, he stated that their business model was not sustainable, as highlighted here. Uh, However, we must remember or understand that the company did not go out of business without serious struggle or effort to survive or sustain themselves. So, in this regard, the company made a number of efforts to, in terms of its makeover and the way they were presenting their content through live shows. But somehow, the nostalgic appeal, by nostalgic, I mean that for many years, the circus had an appeal amongst the different generations of American viewers or audiences who would connect the circus with their past, their childhood, their families, their parents, and it kind of connected them with their their values, their culture as well, and just being American in whatever sense one can take this. So the circus had been struggling to resonate the same kind of nostalgic appeal with regards to modern audiences or the audiences of the current generation. That's why it's written here that they were struggling. Um, and this was one of the major reasons that they lost their essence, which was their nostalgic appeal. Uh, and somehow they were unable to connect with the changing demands or requirements or entertainment needs of the modern or current consumer or audience. So the company's failure with regards to understanding these changing needs, these changing requirements, the trends, was a major contributing factor. And this is something which is explained a little later during some of the other sections that we will review once we are going through this handout a little further. To explain this further, the handout or case informs us about just one example to quote. That is, in 2005, the circus lost one major part of its identity, which was retiring the three rings. Uh, Barnum and Bailey Circus, if you watch any videos of any traditional show on YouTube, you will find that they would arrange their shows in terms of a concept of circles or rings, which was the highlight or the key identifiable aspect of their live shows. Second, very important dimension when besides discontinuing their concept of three rings was was retiring their famous elephants, as mentioned here in the second line of this paragraph, and this was connected with um, pressure from the public, animal rights groups, regarding the company being blamed for animal cruelty, because a lot of their live acts involved different wild animals or animals, for example, lions, for example, horses, for example, elephants, chimpanzees, and so on and so forth. So they were facing a lot of criticism, especially with regards to their handling of elephants. So, under public pressure, they retired these elephants, which was a major highlight of their show. And this also kind of contributed to, the slow and gradual decline of the company. Because the elephants were a major part of their, historic identity or the way their shows were perceived by their audience. Uh, So, but however, in this handout, the author makes this argument that even though they had retired their elephants and gotten rid of the concept of the three rings, which were a key component of their identity, the author tries to argue that that was not really the reason for their failure. It was more about the failure to honor the brand's DNA. Now, what it means is that the for 146 years, the main reason that the company survived was that they had this ability to spark uh, the magic, or to, to woo the audiences, to surprise the audiences, to shock the audiences, to entertain the audiences, to bring genuine happiness to their audiences, to bring genuine excitement to their audience. And it was in that dimension that the company really failed. Um, just by retiring elephants, or getting rid of the concept of three rings, it doesn't mean that you cannot uh, entertain your audience. It's just losing that magic touch. That was the reason. So, and this is something which is explained a little later through further detailed examples of what it means. That is losing or failure to honor the brand's DNA. So, in this last paragraph on the first page, the author goes on to tell us that Ringling Brothers' failure served as an important lesson for casual dining restaurants. Now, please remember that this author is focusing on the American or the US market. That is why this handout, a number of examples regarding various companies, various corporations, even various restaurants are primarily US based. So that is not our concern. Our main concern is to connect some of the lessons in creativity from this handout with any restaurant business or any restaurant sector in any city, including Pakistan and including Peshawar. So moving further, and this is now I'm jumping to page 2. Here, about 5 lessons uh, from the failure of Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey are presented for the restaurant business or restaurant sector, especially casual dining restaurants, which are also called CDRs in this handout. C for casual, D for dining, and R for restaurants. Now, because I'm talking about these casual dining restaurants, I must point out that within the restaurant sector, there is a categorization of different kinds of restaurants. So, for example, one category is the fast food restaurants. Some of the major chains that you're familiar with, for example, McDonald's, uh, Burger King, etc. These are fast food restaurant category. And obviously, as the name suggests, their main focus is on delivering food or providing food or serving the orders within a very short span of time, hence the name or the title fast food. Then you have, for example, the fine dining restaurant category, which means that fine dining restaurants are the ones where food is expensive. There's this element of exclusivity, stylishness, uh, details in terms of the cuisine, the recipes, the food, the presentation, uh, and so on and so forth. Hence the term fine dining, which with their focus on delicacies and so on and so forth. When it comes to, for example, Peshawar as a city, um, we can't say that we have a genuinely fine dining restaurant, but some of us can argue that hotel like Pearl Continental uh, has a fine dining category to some extent. However, when you move towards big cities like Karachi and Lahore and Islamabad, you will find a number of restaurants who can be fitted into this fine dining category. These are expensive restaurants, food is expensive, and there's a lot of focus on presentation and experience. Similarly, one other category that I can refer to is uh, the casual dining restaurants, which is the focus of this handout. By casual dining restaurants, we mean restaurants where you go, you place an order, and there is not a lot of emphasis on uh, uh, presentation. There's not a lot of emphasis on serving specific kinds of consumers. Anyone can just walk in. These restaurants portray a semi-formal or very informal outlook. Any time of the day, you can walk in and order food. And so, in this regard, we can say that most of the restaurants in Peshawar, not all, but most of them fit into the casual dining category, besides the fast food category. Now, when it comes to casual dining, within that there are subcategories like, for example, cafes, for example, traditional cuisine or traditional restaurants, which only offer local KP specific or food which is very much ingrained in the local culture, for example, kadais and kebabs and so on and so forth. And within the casual dining restaurant category, besides the traditional food and the cafes, you also have ethnic foods, for example, Thai restaurant, for example, Chinese restaurants. So you can say that these are sort of casual dining restaurants as well. So this is a background of the restaurant sector. I'm giving this information because some of this can prove to be of help when you are attempting to answer the three questions at the end of this case study as part of your week 9 task or assignment. Now, coming back to this handout in front of you, uh, 5 key lessons, as I mentioned earlier. The first one is a passion for decency resonates with consumers. Now, if you look at this section, the main idea that the author is trying to convey is that businesses, organizations, whether in the restaurant sector or any other sector, who listen to their consumers, who pay attention to what their consumers or some of the other market players or influential stakeholders are saying, um, they are the ones who can survive. And those brands, those organizations, those businesses, including restaurants, who do not pay attention to uh, the trends or what the consumers like or what they dislike or what feedback they are giving, who just carry on with things the way they are and do not make any effort to listen to their client or customer, they are the ones who suffer. So, for example, giving the example of Ringling Brothers, in the very first line, it tells us that Ringling was inundated with bad press. They were having a lot of problems, especially in the 1990s and 2000s, regarding. Uh, it was a public relations nightmare for them, especially like I mentioned, connected with animal rights and some of the other uh, problems that they were facing. And they took these, you know, this bad press or the attack on their reputation lightly, and they really ignored it. And it was, only, only until 2015 that they waited, and that is too long. They should have taken some action in terms of retiring these animals and avoiding the bad press or the credibility problems that were rising. They should have catered or handled that much earlier. So their failure to respect the consumer in a timely manner was a contributing factor. Now, to explain why this happened, the author gives this example mentioned here, which says that did the elephant trainers think that what they were doing was bad? Probably no, more so than those serving us bland, uninspired meals comprised of empty calories and lacking a novel experience. What this sentence tries to suggest to us is that many a times businesses fall into this trap of believing that what they are doing or what they have been doing for years and years and years is the only and the right thing to do. They never question something might be wrong about the way they are handling things or the way they are doing things. So this problem of looking inward, not listening to voices from outside the company, for example, consumers, for example, media, for example, other players in the market, this becomes a serious problem, and that is why those brands who pay attention, they are the ones who resonate with the consumers or who appear like they're responding to what the market is saying, what the consumers are saying, what others are saying. They are the ones who ultimately survive. In order to make a point further, the um, author goes on to give us an example of Sweet Green, which is highlighted here, which is a restaurant chain. It's a US based chain, so obviously most of us will not know, and that is not our concern either. But they give this example of how this chain of restaurants um, has focused on a purpose driven model of local, organic, and sustainable ingredients, and which is very much connected with the modern US food consumer or a certain segment of US restaurant goers or restaurant food consumers. So as long as you are updated, you connect with what the consumer wants, what are their requirements, you will be resonating, you will be connecting with them, and they will respond accordingly. So that's the first lesson for any restaurant sector, to listen to what the consumer wants, to understand and to continuously deliver on that expectation or requirement that the consumers are requiring or expecting. Second lesson is the loss of the founder does not have to mean a loss of the magic. Here, the author tries to convey or tell us that some of the uh, businesses struggle once their CEO or their founder, especially who has originally founded the company or who is the main driving force behind the company, or whoever is the founder of the company, when he retires or he is no longer in charge, many businesses struggle to retain the original magic or the the reason for their fame or the reason for their success. They fail to sustain that magic just because the founder is no more there. And this is something that happened with Barnum and Bailey as well. But more importantly, we are given the example of Walt Disney and Steve Jobs once, and you all hopefully will agree that with these two companies, Disney Entertainment and Apple, they struggle to sustain themselves in terms of their edge in the market, or once their CEOs left. So with the demise of Steve Jobs or Walt Disney, both of these companies faced a tough time. Similarly, one other example that is given is that of McDonald's. You might know that on Netflix there's a movie, The Founder, which tells us the story about McDonald's initial years. Especially, it focuses on the founder of the company, Mr. Ray Kroc, and it is his story. So, if you have time, do watch this movie because it tells us about some of the key dimensions of the restaurant business and how McDonald's became such a leading global brand of the world. So here we are given the example of McDonald's founder Ray Kroc, who was, very famous for his emphasis on high standards of quality, service, and cleanliness. And he was even notorious to the extent that he was so much conscious about quality and consistency that there's famous saying that he used to even measure the French fries with a micrometer, and this is something which is mentioned in this handout in the first paragraph also. And his quest for consistency and his determination that every meal in any McDonald's restaurant in any part of United States or any other part of the world should consistently taste the same. That was one of the core dimensions of the McDonald's magic, and he was the founder of that core dimension of the brand that is McDonald's, uh, Mr. Ray Kroc. But the writer goes on to give us an example of how McDonald's struggled in the later years. For example, we are given the example of the CEO, Mr. Steve Easterbrook, who was the CEO of McDonald's from 2017 to 2019, as mentioned here also. It is believed that he made a number of attempts to revitalize the company. For example, his focus on unlocking financial value, driving operating growth, and create a brand excitement. So he took a number of initiatives. However, the author believes, the author of this handout or writer, that this plan was a drift from Croc's or Mr. Ray Kroc's motto or his original idea behind McDonald's and what it should be. So the author of this handout believes that the company struggled. Some of you might know that Mr. Steve Easterbrook is no longer the CEO. He was removed from his position by the board of McDonald's in 2019 due to some uh, scandal within the company. Uh, and since then, Mr. Chris Kempczynski, if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, he is the CEO of the company. So, anyway, coming back to our original point, point number two, the loss of the founder does not mean a loss of the magic, which means that those businesses, whether restaurants or others, who can look beyond or survive beyond the founder, they are the ones who are going to, make this work in the long run. In the case of Peshawar also, this is a very relevant, or even in the case of any Pakistani restaurant, this is a very relevant issue because uh, any businessman that you talk to, some of them might complain that their presence on the business side, their presence is important because if they're not available, they're not there, somehow the magic doesn't happen. And in the case of restaurants where you're constantly serving food and dishes every day, there are many instances where the owner of the business, the founder of the business, his absence or him leaving the business or retiring from the business due to any reason, it has resulted in the restaurant losing its magic touch or its flavor or its taste or its key reason for why it is loved. So that remains a key problem, and brands need to go beyond this. They need to set up systems in such a way that even if the founder is not there, the brand continues to uh, 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 provide the same level and same quality of products or food. Now, how will this happen? In the restaurant business, there should be a focus on standardization a lot. For example, just merely look at how one of the famous dishes in Peshawar is prepared. That is, for example, the chapli kebab. Some of you might relate with what I'm trying to tell you. If you watch how a kebab is prepared by the cook at any chapli kebab restaurant in Peshawar or any other part of the country, uh, you will find that they're mixing the ingredients in a very casual way, using their judgment or you know, so throwing different masalas into the minced meat without proper measurement. Uh, as a result, you find that most of the restaurants which prepare food this way, they lack standardization, they lack consistency of taste. On the contrary, if you look at, for example, a, a restaurant like Chief Burgers, I'm not saying that their food is the best, but uh, some of you might agree that for many years they have remained consistent in terms of the nature and the quality of the products that they provide. So they have found somehow they have found that formula for each of their ingredients, and they are following the same procedures again and again. So, for example, if you buy a beef burger from Chief today, and if you buy the same burger a month from now, it will taste the same. And that is the same case with McDonald's or some of the other leading global brands also. So they have set up systems which are beyond the founder, for which the founder is not required or the owner of the business is not required. McDonald's have thousands of locations around the world. Yet, if you eat their burger, for example, Big Mac in Dubai, or if you eat their Big Mac in Peshawar, or if you eat their Big Mac in America, as long as you can eat it, it is highly likely that the taste, the consistency, the nature of the product will remain the same. So that's one of the key aspects. Moving further, the third point is in terms of the lessons regarding creativity from the failure of Barnum and Bailey, Ringling Brothers, is brands who think creatively can get back to their original DNA without compromising. Now, what it means is that and this is something explained under this heading or on this point, that uh, many businesses around the world in any sector or category, one of their fundamental challenges is that they struggle to keep up with the changes happening around them. Uh, and in an effort to remain up to date, uh, or remain or run at the same pace as the market is going or the changes that are happening around them, in an effort to remain updated, brands tend to lose their original DNA or their origin or their ethos or their primary reason for why they are there in the first place, or what is the core reason for their success. So somehow, in an effort to remain updated or keep themselves up to date in terms of changing trends, they somehow lose sight of their originality or their core reason of success. So this is something which is highlighted here. For example, the CEO of Barnum and Bailey, Mr. Feld, uh, the handout says that uh, he acknowledged that the challenge of putting a circus show in a modern era. So he said that in the past decade there has been more change in the world than in the past 50 or 75 years. So what he's trying to say is that things have started to evolve or change at a much faster pace. And this is something also highlighted by the former CEO of McDonald's, Mr. Steve Brook, who's in one of his statements, he said that the last 5 years, the world has moved faster outside the business than inside. So wisdom tells us that disruptive technology, disruptions, changes in the market, any technology that comes, usually it has an 18-month cycle, which means that it is very likely that some of the technologies that you come across will be no longer relevant within 18 months' time. So what it suggests to us that the things are so fast and moving so quickly that brands in any sector are under constant pressure to remain updated. And this is something very true for casual dining restaurants, especially those dining restaurants who have a global or presence or who are present in many countries, and they face this constant pressure of remaining up to date in terms of different trends, different parts of the world, different countries, different cultures. So that remains one of their fundamental concerns. And in order to explain this further, uh, and this is something which I mentioned earlier also, this continued quest or pressure to remain relevant in terms of the changing trends, that puts brands or any business, including restaurants, at odds with their DNA. So, for example, Applebees, which is also a restaurant chain in the United States and other parts of the world, the example of Applebees is given, and you can search this further on the internet. They created a brand of restaurant by the name Neighborhood Bar and Grill, and interestingly, the author informs us that in 2016, the company made some headlines when it announced that it was investing $75 million into installing wood-fired grills in all of its restaurants. So, what it suggests to us is that when it was originally started, Neighborhood Bar and Grill, they did not have any live grills as such. But by installing these wood fire grills that were visible, they remained connected with their original DNA, the name, and the reason of their existence, while updating themselves in terms of how they serve food and how it is presented to their customers. Moving to the next point, this is the second last point, or point number 4 of this handout. One other lesson from the failure of Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey is that businesses should not assume immunity from failure. What it means is that a business should never consider themselves as remaining successful all the time. There are many examples of some of the leading brands who were market leaders in any sector, just going out of business. So this is something which is also highlighted here, and this tells us that some of the one of the major reasons for why even the most successful businesses fail is because they go into this bubble of believing that somehow they are immune to failure, or what they are doing is absolutely the best way of putting the products in front of the customer, and they don't need to provide, they do not need to be creative, they do not need to be innovative about it. So for example, in this handout we are told that just 2 months before announcing the closure of the circus, the CEO, Mr. Feld, spoke confidently of the circus business. That is, he genuinely believed that his company has a future, and within a span of 2 months later, the company was closing down. So this is something also true for restaurants. Faced with poor sales and traffic, many casual dining restaurant operators or other businesses, they have this tendency to put the blame on the market or outside factors. They never uh, look inwardly in terms of their internal weaknesses and failures and flaws, where which might be responsible for their struggles or their failure. And they believe that what they are doing is absolutely right, nothing is wrong with them. So one of the very important points which is highlighted is that for most of these chains, the real issue is changing consumer demographics and consumption patterns. So restaurants who understand the pulse of the market, who understand the pulse of the consumers, who understand what the consumer likes, what is in demand, why is it in demand, what kind of food or dishes are preferred and why they are preferred, they are the ones who can survive, uh, even if uh, they feel that they are immune from failure. As long as they do not ignore this fact that they have to remain outdated, they have to have a sense of the market and the consumer preferences and their consumption patterns, they will remain successful, or they will be able to survive. Uh, just to give further example or to augment this point, another example by the author is given that in 2008, Blockbuster CEO, Blockbuster is a company in the business of video rentals, VHS and CD rentals, which stayed in the market for many years. So in 2008, Mr. Jim Keyes, who was the CEO of Blockbuster at the time, he believed or suggested to the reporters that companies like Netflix are not even in our radar, or we don't even consider them as competition. However, just 2 years later, in 2010, his company filed for bankruptcy. So this immunity from failure, this assumption that we will remain successful, is not something to fall for. One further example is given, that is of Cirque du Soleil. This is a Canadian circus or entertainment company which is still surviving and doing very well. In fact, if you have the time, you can go to YouTube or any other internet web page and try to watch some of their content, how they present their shows. Very innovative, very updated. And the author is trying to tell us that Cirque du Soleil, which was in the similar kind of business as Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey, they completely presented their product, their entertainment products, their live shows in a new way, and they are constantly innovating, adding more acts to their shows, um, creatively. They have very highly trained performers. There's a production team, there are creators, designers who focus on the aesthetics of the show, the color, the pomp, the visual aspects, and so many other dimensions. So they're constantly um, uh, they remain constantly creative, uh, and they never settle for one kind of performance. They are constantly churning out new acts, new performances, and innovating through creative thinking and creative approaches. So that example is given. Finally, the last point for from the failure of the circus and how restaurants might be able to learn is the most important one. In fact, that is the most successful brands put the experience first. Uh, Many restaurant businesses have this wrong perception that the consumers visits the restaurant for the food. It is generally believed that in the restaurant business, and in fact in many other businesses who offer any kind of service, it is the experience which is the ultimate product or what the consumer is after. Now, by experience, we mean that experience with regards to restaurant starts from for example, the parking lot of the restaurant. The moment you park your car outside a restaurant, if you're going with your family or if you're going with your friends, how convenient or easy is the parking? How the guard behaves with you outside, how courteous he is, then when you enter the restaurant, how the manager or floor manager deals with you, how they serve the order, how they communicate with you. Once the food comes, how warm it is, for example, the plates, the crockery, the table, how clean they are, the overall environment, the ambience, the comfort in terms of the chairs where you're sitting. Uh, do you feel at ease? Once the food comes, when you eat, again, the taste of the food, which is also very important, but this is one part of the overall package that you're paying for. So you're not paying for the food, you're paying for the overall experience. So you stay in the restaurant for half an hour, 1 hour, that is a whole package. By the time you pay the bill and walk out of the restaurant, and till you sit in your car and you leave, that is where the whole experience ends. So that's the point which is being made here, is that brands that are successful, they put a lot of emphasis on the overall experience. And in this regard, the example of the circus is given, whereby it is stated by the author that the circus, Barnum and Bailey, they clung to or they hung on to a stale status quo. They just, not were not willing to in, be creative or innovative enough uh, to strengthen or enhance the overall experience of the audience. So when an audience buys a ticket for $80 or $100, he or she should feel an enriching experience that is worth that $80. So if the show goes on for 2 hours or 2.5 hours, this is the whole experience. And somehow the company was struggling to offer this experience in an exciting way, in such a way that suggests value for money, or the customer or the audience genuinely feels that it was worth paying $80 for, or $100, or whatever the ticket price is. So experiences has been emphasized in this point. And this further is explained through this example of, in the restaurant sector, for example, what makes a guest's jaw drop and pulse quicken. For example, how food is served. Some of you might uh, connect this with your own restaurant experiences. One of the most exciting moments inside a restaurant is when the food is brought. Now, how this food, when your order is served, how this is served, how it is presented, uh, how valuable it looks like, how is it able to excite you uh, in terms of its presentation, and so these are some of the things which are very important part of the overall experience of a restaurant. And restaurants can be very creative if they want to, in terms of how, for example, once you achieve a certain level of quality in terms of the taste of your food, the rest is all experience along with the food. So restaurants can do small bits and pieces of things to serve their food in a creative way and make this overall experience exciting. Let me give you an example of one of the restaurants, which was by the name TGIF. Thank God it's Friday. This has been a restaurant chain. So I just recall one example of going to the restaurant whereby uh, for some years TGIF would create a unique experience of dining for the customers, whereby when you entered the restaurant, the waiters, they were uh, somewhat dressed like hip hop artists. So, for example, the waiters would be wearing a certain kind of stylish cap or hat. There would be, chains and whatever the ornaments are for the hip hop artists. Their mannerism, the way they would walk the floor, uh, their casual walk, and the way they communicated with each other. One of the waiters would be carrying a basketball, and he would be, uh, uh, acting a little playful inside the restaurant, uh, and generating excitement, talking to the customers, joking with them, connecting with them personally. All these aspects were part of the TGIF experience. So this is just one example of how some of the restaurants can be creative and create dis- uh, a distinct image uh, for themselves in terms of the experience that they. So with that, we come to the conclusion of this handout. At the very end, there are three questions. I'm just going to read these out, and you will be required to answer these using your own understanding of this video talk and the reading of the handout, as well as the concepts that I covered during week 8 last week, which is so the first question you will be required to answer as the task for week 9 is what are the major restaurants in Peshawar or any major city? You just need to provide a list and how their food and services differ from each other. So, for example, just list down 5 or 6 or 10 restaurants and find out or write how these restaurants are different from each other in terms of the food that they serve, the kind of environment that they provide. Just share your random thoughts and ideas. Second question is if new restaurants start opening in the city, this means any change that occurs to the competitive landscape of a city. So, how can businesses of the old ones, uh, how can they be affected? Uh, so, for example, some of the major uh, players in Peshawar's food or restaurant sector are, for example, Chief Burgers, Shiraz, KFC, Pizza, and so many so forth, along with some, most importantly, the traditional foods or the desi foods, which are very popular in Peshawar because of the local culture and preference for certain kinds of food. For example, barbecue food, for example, kadais, and so on and so forth. So, if new restaurants come in, for example, in the cafe category or any other category, what is the likely impact that uh, may occur as far as the old or established players are concerned? So, give your assessment or idea. What do you think? And like I said, there is no single correct answer for any of these questions. You just have to share your thoughts. And lastly, the third question is the most important, which is connecting with the 5 lessons that I discussed just a while ago from this handout, which is what lessons can restaurant owners and managers learn from the failure of Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus, especially with regards to creativity in order to remain competitive businesses or organizations. So you will be required to answer this third question in light of the 5 lessons provided in this handout. So with that, I come to the end of my video presentation. Thank you very much for your time. I look forward to hearing back from you in terms of your assignment, and that is the answer for these three questions. Thank you very much, and see you next time.